This week, I continue my fall series on the Old Testament. And for those of you who have been tuning in, we've covered creation, Adam and Eve, Cain and Abel, Noah and the Ark, and the Tower of Babel. If you've missed them, you can go watch them on the website. And we learned something interesting as we've gone through the book of Genesis. One of the most interesting things is God always creates something really great for humanity, and humanity kind of drives it into the ground, and the cycle begins again. God renews it, and it begins again. And it's a lot like our own spiritual life. There are times when we feel really close to God, and like the seasons, other times we feel very cold and distant. So the cycles are really interesting. The other interesting thing is that if you remember in those stories, I talked about them as mythology, that there were not real people. There was not a real Noah, for example. And this week we begin what is known as the history in the Bible. So the story of Abram, as Jason read it, Abram and Sarai, their names will change to Abraham and Sarah later in the story. Names are very important in the Bible. As people evolve, they get different names. So this is really Abraham and Sarah's story, and it's the beginning of a historical story. The names of locations in the story actually exist. So it's interesting. Abraham begins in modern-day Iraq. He travels through what is modern-day Turkey. He travels into modern-day Egypt, and he ends up in what's modern-day Israel. So all the places he describes are real places, and we're getting into some history. So the story gets quite interesting. Now, Abraham is really important to know about. He is the person who followed God to create the founding of what we call all the modern, all the monotheistic religions. So he is the patriarch of all three major monotheistic religions. In Judaism, he is the founder of the Jewish people and the Jewish nation. In Islam, Abraham is a prophet who moved humanity away from false idols onto the true path. Abraham, interestingly, with current events, I'll share some of the stories that relate to what's going on. But Abraham's first son was named Ishmael, who he had with his slave Hagar, not his wife. Eventually, Sarah, his wife, didn't like it, grew jealous, and kicked out Hagar and Ishmael, pushed them away. And many people feel, many historians would say that's the beginning of what becomes the Bedouin tribes and later Islam. So Muslims, many Muslims believe that Muhammad is a descendant of Ishmael. So all these interesting connections when we look at Abraham. And so for Christians, we see him as the founder of the faith who created the first covenant with God. So at a time of great division in the world right now, particularly religious division, it is important to remember that Christians, Muslims, and Jews all recognize this common person, Abraham, as a very important and key figure. So what is the story of Abraham? Like, what can we learn from this call of Abraham? It sounds nice, sounds interesting. Does it have any relevance to our lives today? So that's what I really want to talk about. I want to talk about what does it mean to be called by God? Abraham was called, he followed, and some pretty exciting things happened. But what about us in our own life? How do we know if God is calling us in a direction? How do we know if we're to even hear it? And how do we find the courage to obey if we do? In today's text, God calls Abraham to leave his relatives, leave the family behind, leave the business, and create a new nation and a new place. And fortunately for Abraham, God speaks directly to him. It's very convenient, because one of the hardest parts of knowing a call is knowing, like, was that really God talking to me or not? We don't quite have it as clear as he did. But Abraham follows his call, and as I mentioned, he travels through Iraq, Turkey, Egypt, and finally ends up in Israel. One interesting thing, another little historical tidbit, because this is also being talked a lot about. There's a big debate about who founded Israel. If you're looking for that answer in the Bible, you will not find it, because when Abraham comes to this land, there's already people there, the Canaanites. The Canaanites are not what are the modern day Palestinians. They're a different tribe that has been incorporated into both Palestinians and Jews. They were probably from the Mediterranean. So the Canaanites were there, and that's who was in the Holy Land at that time. I'm sure somebody was there before the Canaanites. It is interesting, there was a tribe in the southwest region, which is Gaza today, and they were called the Philistines. And that word Palestine, it was created by Rome after they put down the Jewish rebellion shortly after the death of Jesus. And Romans called that area Palestine in an effort to erase the Jewish nation. So ironically, you could say the Roman colonizers created the word Palestine to support their colonizing. The region would go back and forth, being conquered by numerous nations, and most recently the Ottoman Empire, and then after World War II, the British. So it's very tough if anybody's claim we historically can prove we got here first. It would be a lot like trying to do that in the United States. So I thought a little bit of that history would be interesting, and as you're reading current events. But let's get back to Abraham. Abraham follows the call to create a great nation. And at one point, God says, as the song that we heard today spoke about, he says, look at the sky and count the stars, if indeed you can count them. And then he said to them, so this is how many offspring you'll have. Well, at the time, Abraham's wife, Sarah, was beyond the years that she could give birth. That's one reason why she suggested Hagar, the slave, produce an offspring, because she knew that she couldn't. And the story of Abraham is long and winding. And I mentioned he goes through Egypt, and there's a story with his brother, with Lot, who's mentioned in the story, Sodom and Gomorrah. He's greeted by 3 spiritual beings, and it's a long and exciting story. Now, I know something about people at Church of the Holy City. You're a very smart congregation. You love reading. And so tonight, you're probably, I'm guessing, going to go and read Genesis 12 through 24, all those chapters, to get the whole story, because you're not going to be satisfied with just me talking about it. So let me know what you think when you read the whole story. It's long. So, but in case you don't get to it tonight, in case you're just going to have to trust me today, that the story of Abraham is really the story about obedience to God, and how that obedience does not follow a straight path. And that, I believe, is a profound message for us today, because we are created in this world with a physical nature and a spiritual nature. And the physical nature is trying to figure out how to navigate this sphere. Make enough money, get an apartment, get the right relationships, just how do I get through this life? Our spiritual sense is our deeper sense, and that is who we really are, our essence. And it's the thing that travels with us after the physical body dies. And that one is asking, like, what's my purpose? What's my essence? Where am I making my impact? And these two parts of ourselves are often in tension, very often in tension. Because our earthly self is just trying to create pretty much a safe plan for us to survive. We often seek to please others. We seek worldly comforts, and we want to get attention and praise. And then the spiritual path is saying, what do I need to do to serve God? So Abraham, following his call, is also constantly wrestling with this path. Which way do I go? Which way do I go? So God promises something, and that's what I think the most important part of the story of Abraham is that if we have faith and trust in God and really have it, not just say we have it, we're open to it, but really have it, that our path will flow in a path of what's a term we use in our tradition called divine providence. That means doors will open, the people you need will come into your life. You'll get brilliant ideas that pop into your head, and you'll think, where did that come from? And you'll also get clarity in that opening of doors in God's path for you. You'll get clarity on what is your purpose. And in our tradition, we often use the word use. What is your greatest use? How can you be most useful? And if you think about it, in our tradition, we believe everybody is created with a specific and unique use or purpose. And to the extent that we all live it out, we would have heaven on earth if everybody did. But other people, hopefully not us, nobody in this room, but others folks, some people, the path that they choose is actually a hellish path. And that is, it's about them, it's greed, control, power, can be murder, destruction, but it's all about me. It's all about me. So the hellish path it makes up a big chunk of the world. And then there's people who are also seeking this heavenly path. And that is the tension that we face in the world. People have the ability to reject their God-given purpose. And actually, most people do. And we see how that plays out in the world. So that's the tension that we're living in. And that's why I think finding our use or our path or our call, our vocation in our life, our purpose is very challenging. In our tradition, we basically said, if you embrace the love and truth in your life, this will open up to you. You can do it by engaging with people who are also living a life of love and truth, by reading spiritual texts, and constantly confessing when you fall down and getting back up again. The purpose of creation, its use, the whole purpose of all of us being here is to create heavenly communities from the human race. And so as more and more of us seek to follow our path and follow that path that God is guiding us, we will experience an improved world. And when you get on that path, it's so clearly not your path. Like, in other words, it's not, you can't take credit for it. So when you meet people who are really on their path and they say, I've done this by the grace of God, or I can't take credit, they're not being falsely modest. They know that there's too many things happened that fell into place that I have to just thank God, because I couldn't mastermind this. In the story of Abraham and Sarah, they're too old to have children. And a spiritual visitor comes to them and says that you're going to give birth and you're going to create this nation that's going to change the history of the world. And Sarah overhears the conversation. She laughs. And so they have a son, and Isaac, their son, means laughter based on that. So we also in our life will get visions of where we should be going or what we should be doing. And very often we'll just laugh. It will seem ridiculous that would be the path to go on. But truly, I feel like the purpose of Church of the Holy City, and for me, the purpose of church really should be solely to support each of us on our individual path, trying to figure out what our unique use is and just be there for each other in it. We can't do it alone. We do need help. We do need God's help, but we need the support of others. I will say our church does not exist really to grow the Christian faith or the Swedenborgian religion. Those could be outcomes of it, but the true purpose of a church really should be to help people figure out their spiritual path and help them as they move out on it. That's it, in my opinion. And I think that's where church got it wrong. It got into getting people into certain theological viewpoints and signing certain documents of doctrine and so forth. But the truth is, I think it's to help people on their path, and our paths are different at different times of our lives. To the extent that people find their call, that's awesome. And it was great. A couple months ago when Mateus, who's here, got baptized and became a Christian. And that was fantastic. That's fantastic. We also have people who are interested in Swedenborg. I love it. It's great. And so I think we need to be more of a place that's not so interested in seeking converts, but in helping people in this very important question. What is my purpose? What is my use? What's my vocation? Why am I here? In my own struggles, in my own figuring out the path, one of the funny stories, which I've told before in other sermons, but I did have sort of clarity when I was like 16, and I told my parents in the kitchen, my mom and dad, I thought I was called to be a pastor, and the phone rang, and it was, and it was my pastor of my local church asking me to do my first sermon. And so we all laughed because I literally got the call. So I needed to be bonked over the head. But that initial call turned into be a very confusing path. Okay, that's the path, but it got very confusing. And I remember when I was in divinity school, I was in a course with a Catholic priest named Henry Now on spirituality, and I had a partner named Catherine, and she was the perfect partner in the spirituality class. We read each other's journals, and she was just that non-judgmental person who was really there for you. And that is extremely helpful when you're trying to figure out your path. Someone who doesn't judge you, and she actually helped me come out. She's also, it turns out, the daughter of one of America's most famous theologians, Frederick Buechner. And Frederick Buechner has a great line, and I think it's the best line about vocation or purpose or use. So I'm going to read from Frederick Buechner. He defines finding your vocation as a place where your deep gladness and the world's deep hunger meet. So it's the place where your deep gladness and the world's deep hunger meet. So it's like the things that you love the most and where the world needs that the most. And he says, it may not always bring you happiness, but when you're on that, it'll bring you profound joy. And I think that's a good combination for us to look for as we figure it out, because that call that I got when I was 16 turned into a completely, as a confusing path to ministry. Me sitting here today as Abraham's story, or all of our stories. Now, following our path, I want to stress, doesn't mean that we can ignore our earthly needs. That includes income, housing. It also means taking care of our bodies, eating well, getting proper sleep. All those things are very important for our path. But we will also face challenges, and they can be used to our good, even evil that comes into our life. We've all had struggles. We've all had people we've had to wrestle with in our life. We've all had crises, losses, deaths. And so those can also be spiritual teachings on our path as well. God can use evil for spiritual good. But the biggest challenge I find for most people who are looking at what they should be doing in their life is that there's just so many opportunities right now. Which path do I take? And I noticed at dinner a couple weeks ago after the service, one of the folks at dinner just said, well, I've enjoyed hearing about your life, Rich, because it's so convoluted and different. She was more polite, but I don't feel like I have to get it just right. I can do different things. And I think that's really important too. It's not like a lot of young people are being taught today that you need to lock in when you're in high school and then college, and then you're locked in for your life. That is not my experience. There's just a world of possibility. The younger you are, actually, the more possibilities you have. Now, you in other sermons I've mentioned that I did not really want to come to Church of the Holy City, but that was clearly the path, and I avoided it. There's the famous story of Jonah and the whale. He doesn't want to preach in a certain town, and he gets thrown into a whale. Well, I had that experience where if, excuse me, if you pray to God, thy will be done. If you pray that and you mean it, then that will happen in your life. That your path, God will guide you on your path. Now, here's the tricky part. Very often it's not the path we want or we think we want, so we fight it. And I had good reasons why I was kind of done with church. I'd been a pastor earlier in my life. I went into public health. I went into politics. I went into owning businesses. But, churches are hypocritical. I didn't need the community. And there's just a lot of reasons. This church was small. No one would ever know it or come. Couldn't make a living here. The building was in bad shape. All these reasons. There's a lot of reasons not to do it. But it was very clear to me that no matter what I try to rationalize, that prayer, when we pray, thy will be done, look out, because things will open up. And if you're on the wrong path, you will be moved to the right path, which is a blessing. When we are distant from that path, we're not on the right path, we have what's often called a dark night of the soul. And that's when we feel very far from God. We can be in deep depression, and it can feel like things are a disaster. But it's actually a turning point in getting us on the right path. So here I end up at Church of the Holy City, and I have to say, it's just been one of the greatest joys of my life. In all sincerity, I loved it. And last week, as you know, if you've been following our church life, I experienced, as a pastor, the transition of one of our community members a couple of weeks ago, Sydney Freimeyer. And the months before the experience were exhausting, as any of you who've lost a loved one know. But being there for people in those times, I find to be the definition of being useful. So being useful can be in a moment. It can be something that you do. It's not like necessarily a vocation or a career. It can be in the moment. And as I thought about my unusual friendship with Sydney, looking back, it occurred to me that very possibly the purpose of my meeting her was to be with her at her transition. Like that might have been the plan. It sort of makes sense. So being useful can take on many forms and many ways. And you may not be aware of the importance of the roles that you're playing right now, but they could be your use. Those who you serve are your greatest calling. So pay attention to the people that you're serving and taking care of and looking out for. It may not make sense right now exactly how the path is unfolding. Sometimes it only makes sense in hindsight, but your path to use could be unfolding. The critical part is to have faith in God. And we say we do, but we really often don't. But God does have a plan for you. If you pray, thy will be done, that path will open to you. Abraham followed God on a strange and confusing path, and he created the leading world religions around the globe in ways he could really never imagine. He never really saw his huge family. He never saw a nation. He didn't see all of that happen, but he trusted in God and followed the path. And that's true for us. We don't often get to see the whole picture. I think we do in heaven, but we don't on earth. And so God is offering to each of us to be open wherever we are in our life, whatever age, whether we're just, in school right now and thinking about a career, or we're closer to the end of our life and we're thinking, how can I be useful? God has a use for you right now, a purpose that you're serving. And it may not make sense, but if you pray that simple prayer, thy will be done, that path will unfold. So if you trust in God, you will live out your greatest purpose. Amen.